Hi everybody, this is Noah Kadner, and I am super thrilled to invite you to this virtual production primer that I'm co-presenting with NYU Tisch School of the Arts and the Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center. In this course, you're going to learn absolutely everything there is to know about virtual production and how you can leverage it to make incredible movies using LED wall technology and virtual production skills that I've honed over the past quite a few years. I was very excited back in 2020 to get the opportunity to develop courseware and curriculum with Sang and the team at NYU Tisch School of the Arts that ultimately led to the creation of the Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center. And now there is a Master of Professional Studies that you can learn in just 9 months going to this awesome facility and getting a lot of hands-on experience. So let's get started. First of all, who am I? Well, for starters, I am a professional trainer at the Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center, which means I get the opportunity to go over there, share all the cool stuff that I've learned. I'm also, as one of my day jobs, the virtual production editor over at American Cinematographer magazine, which means I get to sit down with all the experts that are doing this stuff for a living. I get to talk with people like J.J. Abrams, James Cameron, and really learn from the best in the business what the latest and greatest technological leaps are happening that allow you to make filmmaking at a whole new level. I'm also author of the Virtual Production Field Guide for Epic Games. We did 2 volumes, and if you want to really get a solid foundation in how virtual production works, how the technology came together, and a lot of the people that leveraged it to make really cool projects, I highly recommend you check it out. It's free, so why not? I'm also host of the Virtual Production Podcast and a series on LinkedIn called Virtual Producer. So all that's to say that I am deeply steeped in virtual production, and I hope that the knowledge that I have to share in this course is going to help you take it to the next level. So without further ado, this is what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, because I think it's very important to define terms, we will give you a good working definition for what virtual production is so you can really understand not only what it is, but what it isn't, because a lot of people think that it's just LED walls. I mean, you can see I'm in my own little LED studio here. I have a tiny little wall in what used to be our living room, but this is just one aspect of virtual production, and we'll get into why that means many things to many people. Next, we'll look at the components of an LED volume so that you can understand all of the different pieces, not only of hardware, but software that work together to make that real-time animation happen right in front of the camera. Next, we will look at a pre-production workflow because, as you might have heard, most of what makes virtual production really unique in the production world is that the kinds of work that you might have done previously in post-production now shifts entirely to pre-production, and everything that you shoot on the day has to be ready to go. So pre-production becomes more important than ever. As part of that, we will look at how to create assets, which are all of the real-time bits of animation, video plates, now even AI backdrops, all the stuff that is necessary to get in front of the camera and look its best. And then once we get in front of the camera, we'll look at the on-set workflow so you can understand all of the different roles that happen within a virtual production LED stage and kind of where the opportunities are and how you can get a gig in there and what kind of gigs there are. Next, we'll look at lighting for virtual production. And this is extremely important because a lot of what makes these things look realistic is the integration of lighting on the subject that matches what's on the wall. In fact, you can look at my setup right here. I've got purple lights on the ceiling of my little virtual backdrop, and look what I've got going on here. Purple on my shoulder. So very important to make those things match, but also very easy because you can see it entirely in camera. Next, we're going to look at some of the opportunities in virtual production because I imagine a big reason why you are looking to this as a potential career is you want to make sure that there are gigs to be had in this. And I can tell you, whether you're working on a stage or whether you're building the content that goes on a stage or just so many of the corollary things that go around it, there are plenty of opportunities around virtual production. And so if there's something that you're even remotely interested in that we talk in today, there is likely a job that has something to do with it available. And then finally, in the end, I will give you my current prognostications on where I think virtual production and filmmaking in general are going next. So with that sort of session overview game plan in mind, let's get started. So really, this I think is a very key question to answer if you're interested in this stuff is what exactly virtual production is. People hear it and they think, oh, are we talking about LED walls? Like if it's an LED wall, it's virtual production. Well, yes, that's not the only thing that virtual production is. So let's dive in. I think of virtual production as where the physical and digital worlds meet. And what does that mean? Well, if you look at this example, you've got real actors, real physical human beings sitting on a real physical piece of set in front of a real camera, but a vast majority of what is playing behind them is real-time animation. So in that sense, if we can look at many different techniques in which something that might have been post-production in the past is now pulled forward into production and put in front of the camera, all of that is virtual production. So I'm talking about real-time compositing. I'm talking about motion capture. I'm talking even about something like the movie Avatar, which actually was the first film that coined the term virtual cinematography because they were able to use the movements of real actors to drive digital characters. So in that sense, the real authentic world of filmmaking was being mixed with what processes that might previously have been done entirely in post-production in a non-real-time manner. So, again, it's that mix of the physical and digital worlds. It's also a combination of real-time animation and physical production. Again, what you see on the screen can be a video plate, but it can also be real-time 3D animation that is literally occurring as the camera rolls and responds to the camera's movements. So it really is that combination of those two worlds, and the way you mix them together, hopefully, gives you the best of both possible worlds. It's also a bit of a philosophy, this idea, again, of fix it in pre. And when we say fix it in pre, we mean fix it in pre-production, as opposed to fixing it in post where you're like, oh, well, we're shooting a green screen. We didn't really get everything in camera, but who cares? We'll fix this in post-production and make it look right. The idea with virtual production, especially with LED walls, is to try and get everything right in front of the camera so that instead of treating what looks like a visual effects shot as something that has a lot of work to be done in post-production, you get it all in camera. At the end of the day, you have really high-end looking stuff, but it's all done. It's ready to be edited. You don't need to do anything else other than, cut it as if it were full live action material. So it really is a kind of a what you see is what you get style of filmmaking that has a lot of benefits for the crew, has a lot of benefits for the actors, because it's so much easier to get everybody on the same page when it's just like, look at that monitor, that's the shot, as opposed to like, oh, well, part of that is a green screen. There's going to be some really awesome skyline behind you, so, act accordingly. The sun is just set, so it looks all nice and purple. I mean, it's way easier to just be like, look at the monitor, dude, you got it. Also, there are some environmental advantages of working in virtual production, especially with LED volumes, because for one thing, you don't have to go anywhere. You can shoot an entire movie within one soundstage, which means you don't have to get on planes, trains, automobiles, use up a lot of carbon, gas, you name it. You don't have to damage nature by going out. You can just carefully build up your own little set. Also, LED technology itself is very environmental because it's very low power. I mean, in the past, in order to get some kind of setup like this, even close to this sort of equivalent, you'd be dealing with very high-powered projectors, lots of very high-powered tungsten lights, and the amount of energy you'd be using in order just to get an image would be a lot more. When you think about the environmental differences when shooting everything on a soundstage, and with a lot of the set, a virtual set, which doesn't have to be built out of materials that you're maybe just going to throw away when you're done filming. It can all be saved in the computer, reused. A great way to make a movie with the lowest amount of impact possible. The big takeaway for me is that any time that you're mixing real-time workflows that might have been in post-production before with something that's in front of the camera, you're probably doing some aspect of virtual production. So let's move on. What's next? Well, understanding how virtual production works really requires you to understand the basic components that go into making an LED volume. And what's interesting is I've been in dozens of LED volumes around the world, and they share a lot of things in common, but they're all, slightly different in how they operate and their workflows and their specific components. These things are very bespoke. It's not like you can go, some manufacturers will sell you a kind of turnkey system, but when you consider what you need to use it for, how large you're going to build it, the components you're going to work with, there's just a wide variety of different scenarios that would call themselves a virtual production LED volume. They do share some basic tenets in order to make it all work. So let's look at that. Really, number one, I think, and what kind of led to this entire sort of virtual production renaissance of filmmaking is Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is a game engine that was originally designed to make very high-end, very realistic-looking video games. If you've ever played games like Fortnite, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Because video games, they obviously need to run in real time because you can't wait for it to render while you're playing. You need things to move like right now. And the image quality of Unreal Engine got so good over the years that filmmakers, in this case, Jon Favreau and the folks over at Lucasfilm, when they wanted to do The Mandalorian, looked at Unreal Engine and said, hey, is that something we can put on these high-resolution LED walls, and instead of shooting green screen, if we wanted to do a show like Star Wars, but on the schedule of a TV series, could we use Unreal Engine to get those shots directly in camera and just skip a lot of that time in post? And sure enough, with a lot of work on both sides, it came together. And so that's where kind of the main magic of virtual production with LED volumes comes from, is Unreal Engine. And kind of the second sort of side to that coin is the LED wall itself. Now, LED wall technology, fortuitously, in the past 6 or 7 years, has increased in quality, both in terms of resolution that the screen can put out and in terms of color space and just brightness, like all the things you need a screen to be in order to look like a backdrop and not, a Jumbotron at a baseball game. That's what this technology happened to improve to. So you can see, for example, this is the Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center. You can see this is kind of a cave style configuration where you've got a curved wall as the main backdrop. And then you've got ceiling LEDs as well. Those are not 100% necessary to do LED production, but it's great because you get a lot of additional sort of interactive lighting by projecting the same content both on the ceiling and on the wall to just make things simpler and easier to work with. And it's especially useful for, as you can see in this setup from one of my classes, thank you very much, where you can do car process stuff. And LED walls are, again, extremely bespoke. They're typically built out of kind of 0.5 meter by 0.5 meter individual panels. So you can build pretty much any shape, configuration, size you can imagine. And, it's kind of like buying carpeting. I mean, you're basically paying by the panel. So, I mean, however, the larger your system is, the more expensive the wall is, the more expensive the number of processors and video nodes you're going to need to make it all work. But, again, it really comes down to what you need to accomplish and the budget you have to work with. I've seen LED setups that are as small as literally a TV behind someone's desk to double, triple, quadruple the size even of Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center. So it really does scale up and down. But again, if you understand how this stuff works, which is basically you're putting animation, video plates, you name it, behind the subject on this wall, it all works the same way conceptually. Again, what really is important when you're working with these LED walls is that you work with good cameras and good optics, because part of the sort of optical illusion of virtual production with LED volumes is you need to really control the depth of field. Like if you look at my setup here, I'm sitting less than 3 meters away from my LED wall here, but because I'm using a nice camera with a lens that is has a very controllable depth of field, I'm able to throw that backdrop slightly out of focus so that instead of looking like a flat surface that's very close to where I'm sitting, it looks more like something that is much further away with depth. So having cinema cameras, having high-end optics with solid depth of field control are really critical to making LED volume setups work. Next, an important kind of critical and sort of like the missing link piece of all this is camera tracking. If you look at this slide on the lower left, you're seeing what we call a frustum. A frustum is basically just a view into a 3D world that is directly tied to the camera. If you look on the right in this slide, you can see there's this kind of unusual looking thing on top of the camera with the little dots on it, which we call a crown. And what that does is that is tracked, in this case, by outside-in looking trackers, Vicon trackers, that can tell exactly where, by looking at those markers and kind of comparing it to the memory it has stored of what that configuration looks like, it can tell the orientation and position of the camera in the stage and then communicate that positional data back to Unreal Engine so that it draws the corresponding three-dimensional perspective so that as the camera moves, the screen sort of does the opposite move so that rather than look like a flat surface, it actually looks like something with three-dimensional depth. And through the camera, it looks like you're looking into, can tell exactly where, by looking at those markers and kind of comparing it to the memory it has stored of what that configuration looks like, it can tell the orientation and position of the camera in the stage and then communicate that positional data back to Unreal Engine so that it draws the corresponding three-dimensional perspective so that as the camera moves, the screen sort of does the opposite move so that rather than look like a flat surface, it actually looks like something with three-dimensional depth. And through the camera, it looks like you're looking into a stage or a window, but not a flat surface. And that, again, is really the magic of virtual production with an LED volume. Now, another piece of that pie is the lighting. If you have a setup with an LED ceiling, you get a lot of that for free. But you still need to augment that with cinema lights. And the easiest way to make everything match is to connect the cinema lights via DMX to the screen content so that you can basically say, like, if there's something purple on the screen, I want to sample, like literally eyedropper a bit of that so that my lights are doing the same thing. And in that way, you can very quickly build up a kind of overall ambient light to your foreground subject that really does feel like it's matched to what's showing on the screen versus, you know, you've all seen bad process photography, bad green screen where the lighting that's on the actors just completely is mismatched to what's in the backdrop. And it takes you out of the show because you're just like, well, that person looks like they're pasted on in kind of a bad Photoshop or something, and they're not really standing in front of whatever this thing is behind. So virtual production right off the bat makes that much easier because it's extremely easy to the naked eye to just look through the camera and say, there should be this light that's over here that doesn't match the backdrop. And, you know, it's just a lot easier for everybody to make everything look integrated and real. Now, another very important component of these setups is the insanely powerful computers that are able to draw this real-time animation at 24, 30, 60 frames per second. And when you do that, you're typically talking about workstation class computers with really high-end NVIDIA GPUs, because again, they have to do that real-time animation without losing a frame continuously in front of the camera. You're seeing the product of several of these high-end computers sort of gang together using a technology called N-Display, which Epic Games, the makers of Unreal Engine, makes. And it essentially synchronizes all of those different GPUs on all those different computers together so that they're all drawing their own little slice on different parts of the wall. But when you look at it in the room, it just appears as if this giant screen with all this resolution is one giant monitor, but it actually is multiple computers putting their output together and synchronizing it to appear as if you've got this one giant image. So again, that's a lot of processing power. And of course, behind the screen, behind the wall, probably in another room somewhere because these things are really loud and need a lot of cooling, there's typically a kind of a data center sort of server room in which all of the networking, rendering, and video processing pipeline are carefully synchronized together and operated. So, you know, again, talking about the opportunities around this, which we'll get into a little bit later, there's a lot of hardware that's necessary to make these things work. But again, the cool part is if you go to one of these stages as a filmmaker, you don't have to worry about all that stuff. You're just going to come in and it's like you turn your camera on and oh my goodness, I'm looking into this magical screen that can basically take me anywhere in the world or outside of the world. And again, not to get too deep into the weeds, but here is a little diagram that just gives you the sort of basic sort of signal flow. In this example, you've got a screen and the LED kind of in the center there that happens to be divided up into three what we would call nodes, three little slices. Each one of those slices has its own LED processor, which is basically the hardware that sits between the computer and the screen and translates GPU signal out of a computer into what is basically individual pixels on these LED panels to make everything look like a giant image. And those are connected to these render nodes that are clustered together using your kind of typical network switches so that everything is talking at a very high rate of speed, fiber, Ethernet, you name it. The top there, the Genlock signal generator, what that does is it essentially provides a synchronization signal so that the screens, the render nodes, even the cameras are all making their frames together simultaneously so that you don't see any weird like scan lines on the screen or just any kind of distortion that would indicate an out of sync component somewhere in the chain. Finally, on the right there, you've got the tracked camera, which has to be connected into the system because it's essentially telling those render nodes what part of the image that they're carrying, that 3D scene, what part to then display on the LED processors so that as the camera moves around, everything appears to be in a three-dimensional world and not just a flat surface. There's a lot more about these individual components, and obviously the way they're put together is a very key piece of the integration puzzle, but that's just a kind of basic look of the main sort of pieces of hardware and software that are necessary to make virtual production on an LED volume work. So next, let's get into the pre-production workflow. And again, to go back to the beginning of this presentation, we're talking about fix it in pre. The number one takeaway, the number one motto that I give to everybody on this fix it in pre side is it's very, very, very important that whatever is going to be in front of the camera, you have prepared and ready to go so that on the day you're just capturing your footage and not worrying about, oh, do we have this environment ready? Oh, it's not quite, it doesn't look photorealistic enough. Like all that needs to be worked out before you end up shooting just so that, things go smoothly. And to really make that work, you need to interact very carefully. You being, let's say the producer, the director, the cinematographer, the interaction with the production designer and the virtual art department or the VAD is really critical because those are the people that are figuring out what's going to be on the screen, what's going to be built for real, how they're going to blend. And the more time you spend developing those assets and making everything look really good and really well integrated for the story you want to tell, the better things are going to go. Some of the many ways that we can build those assets in pre-production are, it's again a typical 3D sort of pipeline. You can use reference photography. I mean, basically anything that you do in a 3D pipeline can ultimately wind up on an LED wall for virtual production. It just becomes a question of, how am I going to build that asset? What is the most efficient method? How much time do I have? How much budget do I have? This is what it takes to bring it all together. In addition to figuring out how you're going to build your model, you can use tools like virtual camera, where you can use something like an iPad acting as if it were a camera. You can move it around and sort of use that to look into the virtual world and sort of plan your shots out. This is an example from the third floor, I believe, being used on some show with a dragon. I don't know which. They are able to visualize how their three-dimensional assets will look before you set foot on a soundstage, which, as I'm sure you know, is usually the most expensive part of a production. You want to be efficient. You don't want to be wasting time. You don't want to be trying to find your shots or trying to decide if your assets look good enough. Tools like virtual camera can really help. And in addition to that, you can use all these cool VR headsets that just keep getting better, cheaper, and easier to use to actually walk around and sort of visualize how things will work spatially. Virtual scouting was used a ton in shows like The Lion King, which we consider a virtual production, kind of the reverse of an LED wall production, but similar idea in the sense that cameras were being used with real-time animation to take what appeared to be a nature documentary, but was completely computer animated, but they were able to mix movements of real camera platforms, dollies, drones, you name it, into the virtual world. And virtual scouting was a big part of that because as they were making the movie, they would go around and be like, here's a new virtual set. Let's walk around in our headsets, figure out where we're going to take our shots and, just get the lay of the land, so to speak, and really understand how these sets are going to work so we can make the most of them. So virtual scouting is very useful for that. This looks complicated, but the idea of this is to just kind of follow the through line that takes you from pre-production, working with the virtual art department, looking at visualization, figuring out how you're going to shoot these things, maybe even pre-editing some sequences so that when you get to principal photography, you know exactly what you're going to do. And hopefully you're going to use a lot of LED wall stuff because that's what I like. And once you're done, you get into editorial and hopefully you're doing much less compositing and much more kind of standard kind of off-the-shelf editorial work so that you get to final delivery much quicker. And again, this is similar. This is not that different from the traditional pre-production, production, post-production pipeline. It's just the emphasis is more in pre-production preparation and in production to get finished shots and using post-production as kind of finessing, editing, adding sound design, all that kind of stuff versus doing the bulk of visual effects work in post-production. That's really the key takeaway. So again, that is just a look at how the pre-production workflow goes. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into asset creation. What are assets? Well, anything that's going to wind up on the wall is an asset, whether that be a 3D model, a video plate. Now we're using AI to make certain types of backdrops. An asset is just any piece of content that's going to wind up on your wall. More than anything, if there's one important aspect that every asset needs to share, it is realism. It is detail. You want things that end up on the screen and don't look like CG, don't look like animation, but just look real. Because that is what is going to hopefully disappear. And when somebody's watching their movie, they're not going like, oh my God, those LED wall effects are so cool. They're just going to be like, oh, where'd they shoot that? That's the goal. Where you get these assets kind of depends, again, on your budget, your time frame, and what you really need to do and what might be available. There's a lot of marketplaces out there, both from Epic itself, like the Fab marketplace, that have pre-existing Unreal Engine scenes that you can use. There's also really good 3D libraries out there that you can tap into. It's not that hard to take something that was created, let's say, for Blender, Maya, 3D Studio, and turn it into an Unreal Engine environment. All those things are totally doable. The cost of these assets is surprisingly affordable when you look at the quality that you're getting. So again, a lot of stuff to work with out there. Here's another look at the Fab marketplace. What's cool about Fab is that not only are a lot of the assets really inexpensive, but every month they typically will give away quite a few of them. And so it's always good to kind of come around and just sort of see what's available. I mean, there's surprisingly good stuff out there. So another great marketplace is KitBash 3D. This is cool. They have a lot of environmental stuff. And what's neat about KitBash 3D is that everything is very modular. So you can very quickly build up. Let's say I want to mix San Francisco and Cyberpunk. No problem. You can take a lot of the pieces from each one of those individual sort of sets and mix and match until you've got something really cool. And again, it's very easy to use these things to make things that look really complicated, but are not that bad. And it's very important, though, when you're working with these content libraries to read the fine print, make sure you have the rights to use these things, like that they're not just video game assets or demo assets, but that you're actually allowed to use them to create your own content. And of course, anything that you can create sort of traditionally in 3D, like here's actually our stage down in Simplemente in Mexico City that I regularly consult for, modeled in 3D. And this is a setup that we use to kind of test out assets and sort of see how it goes. But it's just to show you that anything you could build in any sort of off-the-shelf 3D app can ultimately become part of a setup that ends up on an LED wall. And in addition to 3D stuff, you can make video plates. Driving scenes are really one of the big bread and butter setups of virtual production. You're not doing camera tracking, you're not doing 3D stuff, but with a setup like this from my good buddies over at PlatePros, you're shooting 360 equirectangular driving plates that you can then project and sort of show any angle you want on an LED volume and quickly get really cool looking, very realistic looking LED wall shots without having to go on the open highway, get permits, deal with safety factor, changing weather, all that kind of stuff. Just get really smooth, easy, safe, cool looking driving scenes by using video plates as your backdrop. Here we go. All right, so that's a look at PlatePros. Another sort of interesting technology that one can use if one you want to do driving plates is SimPlates from my good friend Alex Pierce, makes these things. What's cool about SimPlates is they are animated backdrops. They're animated 360 driving scenes. But what's cool is they're bespoke and they can be made very photorealistic and they can be made essentially to order so that instead of having to even worry about the challenges in permitting and all that kind of stuff of going out and shooting real plates or the time or the expense or the technical complexity, whatever, you can just have them made to order and have them drive through any environment, day, night, you name it, and be ready to shoot. It's great. They have a great library, and here is a quick look at how one of these things looks. And again, they're super useful. I love SimPlates. I think it's a great solution to one of the big challenges of virtual production, but also one of the great strengths, which is driving scenes. So highly recommend you check them out. Another way to create assets with Unreal Engine for Unreal Engine is photogrammetry. This is an example of a bit of content from Epic Games' Megascans library, which is cool because they have this team of folks that just goes around to all kinds of crazy environments and shoots with really high-end cameras, digital photography of real things, and then goes back to the computer, uses photogrammetry software, reality capture, and is able to make these very high-end looking assets. And again, what's super cool and what I love about Epic Games is you have access to a lot of this library pretty much for free. So again, there's just a ton of content that you can be using to make very high-end looking stuff. Now you can do your own photogrammetry. It's not that tricky. I mean, the basic idea of photogrammetry is you are taking many photographs of an environment or an object, and then the computer looks at all those different photographs and essentially infers the 3D geometry by comparing the sort of optical differences from shot to shot. In order to make that work, you just need a good camera. I mean, you can do this with your phone, but one downside of phones is that they do a lot of sort of automated image adjustment that creates a less consistent group of photos. So if you can get your hands on a more manual camera, or at least use an app that has a manual mode, you'll end up with better results. This is an example of a setup that I did to capture a little shoe in 3D. And I used a very nice Sony still camera there, along with an automated turntable to get really good reference photography of this real object, and then auto-magically turn it into a 3D object. And, you know, again, anything you can imagine, person, place, or thing, up to a certain scale, of course, you can recreate with photogrammetry. Here's just a quick look at how that looked in the end. Again, when I just said earlier about the scale of things, another way you can get very large environments brought into the 3D world as assets is through the use of drones. We have a really cool DJI drone now that basically you draw like an area on a map where you want it to capture an environment, and it just goes and just sort of like goes back and forth, takes pictures from all kinds of crazy angles, and essentially within 10 minutes, it does a really insanely great series of photos that go right into photogrammetry, and you just instantly essentially digitize the location. So, you know, the tools that there are out there to make this work are great. And here's a quick look at drones in action. Epic, again, gives you a great tool, reality capture software that you basically just feed it a folder worth of photographs, and it will do all the heavy lifting to make it into a really nice looking high-end model. Photogrammetry is something that's been around for 20 years now, so it's a very mature technology, very straightforward and easy to use, and a great way to get very high-end, very realistic 3D models of things in real life without spending a lot of time or money. So, you know, a great technique. Something that's new, or new-ish now, whenever you're watching this, is Gaussian splats. Gaussian splats essentially take photogrammetry to the next level because they mix the optical data that you're getting by taking multiple photographs of an environment or a scene or a model or whatever, and mixing that with LiDAR scans so that you end up with something that not only looks three-dimensional, looks realistic, but also has kind of a notion of the lighting that changes on that thing. So if you're talking about reflective, transparent, translucent surfaces, Gaussian splats do a much better job of capturing that data and making something that doesn't just look like a still photograph that you can look at from many different angles, but really more closer to a live, living, breathing, three-dimensional environment that could actually be that thing. So again, you know, a great technique. And here's a quick video from my good buddies over at Xgrids, that make the Portal Cam and a bunch of other Gaussian splat scanners. They're actually used for a variety of purposes, architectural, cultural, like heritage preservation, but they're also great for virtual production. So let's take a quick look at how that process works. This is, again, a look at an environment that is being viewed in a Gaussian splat scanner. If you look, for example, at the pond, you can see the reflection of the ceiling above it, the translucent glass ceiling, changes as the perspective changes, which is great because, again, this just adds to the realism and makes you feel like you're looking at a live scene, not something that was captured. Now, of course, if we go deep into the splats, you can see things kind of blow up in the end. But I mean, that's the idea. So anyways, that's just a look. And here is an example of a Gaussian splat that I did in order to create a driving plate. This is driving in Unreal Engine through a Gaussian splat recording. And with that, I can basically make my own driving scene. And if you look at it, you can see like it's truly three-dimensional. I'm not just looking at a sort of like 2D photograph as I'm driving through this in Unreal Engine in my sequencer. I'm looking at real 3D geometry. So, again, these are just some of the very different but very useful ways that one can create the kind of content that is necessary to deliver a realistic looking backdrop on a virtual production LED wall. So now that we've looked at pre-production and we've looked at how to create assets and we've defined virtual production itself, let's dive into what the on-set workflow is like, because if you decide to come to Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center, this is what you're going to be doing day in, day out. So hopefully you'll like this stuff because it's a lot of fun. What's happening on a virtual production stage is you've got obviously a traditional filmmaking crew. You've got cinematographer, director, actors, the team that supports them. But then you've also got this entirely other team that's essentially running a live video production on the wall itself. And those people are part of what you would call engine operations, mission control, and the people that are on there are going to be like your virtual production supervisor, which is sort of the liaison between what's happening on the screen and what's happening in the traditional movie crew. You've got engine operators, who are the people that are operating the 3D scenes that are being displayed from Unreal Engine itself. You've got technical directors that are dealing with things like the LED wall and like the video processing pipeline and the network processing pipeline that's making everything work on the screen. You've got real-time compositors who are working out how these things are going to actually look and come together. DITs that are working on things like color science. All of this is a dialogue that's happening with the virtual art department so that when the live action filmmaking team and the actors and the set pieces that are being built on the stage and the digital world that's going to be behind them on the wall, all of that coalesces into one homogeneous image and hopefully looks as realistic as possible. And that is sort of the turnkey to making sure all that actually works out. This is a collaboration between the production designer, the director, the cinematographer, the VAD. Everybody's working together with the goal of blending so that when you look through the camera, it's hard to tell where wall and floor ends and where the digital world and the physical world meet. Hopefully, I have been on many virtual production sets where even to my eye, it's really hard for me to be like, wait, is that person that's standing there an extra in the background? Oh, wow, they're on the screen. Or is that set piece, that thing on the wall? Oh, no, that's not just resting against the screen. That's a real, that's in the wall. Amazing. As you're working with your on-set workflow, one of the main tools you have in your camera to make sure that blending works is controlling depth of field. Make sure you're sharp on your actors, your set pieces, but you're kind of like, throwing the backdrop a little out of focus. Because if you think about it, something that may seem like, let's say you're looking at a pastoral scene of people at a campfire and the mountains are on the screen. In real life, those mountains would be miles and miles away. And of course, they'd be slightly out of focus if you were focusing on the foreground of your people sitting at the campfire. If they're on a little soundstage that is in front of a wall, they might actually truly be 10 feet away from that backdrop. So by controlling depth of field, you can assist with that optical illusion and make sure that to the camera, things truly look further away than they actually are. And depth of field is your kind of key tool of that. And you're also looking to avoid what we call moire. Now, moire is a sort of distortion pattern that comes up. If you look kind of over this person's shoulder in the ceiling, you can see a little bit of it. Essentially what it is the camera, digital camera, has a pattern on its image sensor of a bunch of little pixels. And the screen itself is also essentially comprised of a bunch of little pixels put together. And if the camera can sharply see that screen, you can get into a situation where those pixels kind of compete with each other, this image sensor pixel and the wall pixels, and you wind up with these weird distortion patterns because they're kind of like overlapping each other and sort of making a mesh that just looks weird. So again, depth of field is how you can avoid that. Another important consideration to think about, and again, this is from my good buddies over at American Cinematographer, where I write for all the time. This is from one of my articles. You can look this one up about color science and on-set workflow. But the challenge with using an LED volume is the panels themselves do not put out a complete spectrum of color. Like if you look in this little diagram over here, the little peaks in blue, green, and red that you see over there refer to the individual color emitters that are on an LED wall, because they are actually made of only red, green, and blue pixels, and they mix together in ways that make it look like it's a continuous color spectrum, but it really isn't. So what happens is, if you're on an LED volume and you only light with the screen itself, you wind up with those holes in the spectrum. And what that can do is, to people's faces and to set pieces and to props, it makes the color look weird. Like, because there's more red and there's nothing in between the orange and yellow, faces tend to go more magenta, kind of lobstery face, as we would call it. And set pieces just don't look their full color spectrum. So it's extremely important when you're working on an LED volume that you also bring in cinema lighting, because LED cinema lights have additional lighting emitters in them that will fill in those missing chunks of spectrum and give you a more accurate color rendition. So that's very important. Metamerism is exactly this effect where things that are one color appear different on camera because they're not receiving the full spectrum of lighting, because they're in an environment where there's holes in the spectrum, like as we're showing in that diagram. So watch out for that. Keep a good eye on things. Your eye, unfortunately, can be deceived very easily. It wants to make things look correct. So you can be on one of these stages very quickly and not realize that the color is inaccurate. So it's very important to always look at a calibrated monitor while you're filming so that you can tell whether that's happening or not. Latency and lag. Now, what are latency and lag? So if you think about it, when the camera makes a move and Unreal Engine draws the corresponding perspective shift on the screen, there's always going to be a bit of a delay between those two things happening, because the camera's got to move, the trackers have got to figure out where it moved to, they've got to then communicate to Unreal Engine where the camera went, Unreal Engine's got to draw the corresponding change in 3D space, that's got to then get sent back out and then put onto the wall. Those things take time. Now, and when we talk about time, we're talking about fractions of a second. But I mean, if you get into half of a second delay, that becomes noticeable to the camera, to the point where it's like the camera moves and the frustum kind of seems like it's lagging behind. So these are things that an experienced mission control or engine operations team that knows what it's doing will be able to address and make sure that you don't get yourself into a situation where that's visible on camera. Another piece of the on-set workflow is working with 2D playback tools. If we're not working in Unreal Engine, we're probably projecting some sort of video content that needs a system that is able to project that content onto the non-standard. You know, when you look at these screens, they're not 4K monitors curved in a shape. They're kind of bespoke resolutions that require specific playback tools. So Pixera is one of those tools that they use at Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center to do precisely that. We have a quick video that shows it in action.
Hi everyone. We just wanted to give you a quick Pixera update from our HQ. We received some extremely helpful feedback from amazingly talented customers, which we'd like to share with you now. So without further ado, here are 5 reasons why you should use Pixera for your next XR-based project. You can just add Unreal assets like lights directly to the Pixera timeline. In Pixera, N-Display config files are created automatically and can be transferred directly to each client. Resources that contain their own 3D worlds have been integrated in a way so that their compositing is seamlessly combined with Pixera, so that you can easily dive into 3D worlds within 3D worlds. Our direct rendering approach builds on the Epic Games N-Display technology to distribute Unreal rendering over multiple servers. Decentralized rendering keeps the network load light, since no texture data needs to be streamed. This allows Pixera XR environments to scale flexibly while presenting a unified experience with all scene components in perfect sync. The way in which Pixera integrates Unreal Engine scenes into your timeline workflow means there is next to no learning curve if you already know how to use Pixera. Find out more about Pixera at www.pixera.one.
Next up, let's look at one of really the key aspects of how virtual production is made to look as realistic as possible on screen, which is lighting for virtual production. So again, we've been talking about this quite a bit. The most important takeaway from this is using lighting to make the set pieces and the actors that are really there in front of the camera look like they're in the same environment as the LED wall. It's extremely easy to make them look like they're not. But again, I'll do a quick demo here just so you can see what I'm talking about. You look at me right now and you're like, oh, you're just sitting in that arcade, right? But if I turn the lighting off, suddenly I'm kind of standing in front of a movie screen in the dark. Right? It doesn't look like I'm quite so integrated, but I click those things back on and it's like, oh yeah, you're just there. So again, being able to see all that stuff in the camera and make the changes necessary to really make it feel like there's a sun over there. Let's put some lighting that looks like it's coming from the sun, lighting them as if it would be in real life. You got to think about all those things. But again, because it's what you see is what you get filmmaking, it's a lot easier to see if you're getting it right because you can just see it. DMX controls make this a lot easier because you can gang a lot of lights together, send them very specific brightness and hue commands, have them synchronize with things that are happening on the screen. It's just a way, way, way easier way to work to make things very quickly match the exact look that you're going for.
As lighting and technology continue to mix and merge, we're seeing a rise in a new style of lighting: image-based lighting. Image-based lighting samples a video or virtual environment and communicates the color and motion, typically in the form of RGB or XY coordinates, to the lighting fixtures, allowing for real-time, immersive lighting. This approach is great for creating ambient environmental lighting when shooting on a volume, or if you're just looking for a more nuanced lighting effect while shooting on location. With the snap of my finger, I can be in the desert, in the jungle, or even on the beach. But turn the image-based lighting off and see the difference? There are typically 4 primary considerations when deciding how to configure your vortex for IBL: single pixel or multi-pixel control, 8-bit or 16-bit, why you should consider choosing CIE XY over an RGB mode, and reviewing your CreamOS settings: DMX smoothing, color space, dimming curve, and network settings.
When we talk about pixel mapping, which is how this stuff works, this is an example of a very simple interface. You can see I've got this sort of cloud pattern that's moving around, and I'm sort of simplifying it down a little bit so that each of the individual panels or pixel areas or however a lighting instrument is created and laid out, I can map to a very specific piece of the image. And what I'm taking from that image is typically my hue and intensity, so that if there's, say, time-lapse clouds on the screen, the lighting is sort of undulating, showing the same colors, and it just feels very much like they're all part of the same environment versus a screen doing one thing and the foreground subject doing something completely different. Next, let's look at opportunities in virtual production. When we say opportunities, of course, we're talking about jobs. And like I've been saying since the beginning, LED volumes are simply one form of virtual production. If you like anything about this workflow, there are many other industries that you can work across. Live stage shows use this technology, video games use this technology, post-production filmmaking uses the technology, design, architecture, CAD work, you name it. So if there's any aspect that you see in here that's even remotely interesting to you, there are opportunities around it. Let's take a look at what the opportunities are specifically in relation to LED volume stuff and, see how it goes. When you're working in virtual production, you are working in a traditional filmmaking world as well. So all of the same positions that are available to a typical production are going to be there. Your director, your director of photography, grips, gaffers, AD, producers, all those folks, they are working in the same environments as you would be if you were just doing virtual production. So all of those are jobs available to you to be able to work in virtual production. Second of all, probably the most advanced person in the food chain of virtual production is the virtual production supervisor, because this is really a person who needs to know everything there is about virtual production and its capabilities, as well as understand enough about filmmaking to be able to kind of go back and forth between those two worlds, to be able to hear what the filmmaking team needs and communicate that to the people in the virtual art department or the engine ops, so that they can accomplish technically what needs to be done to make the film crew get what they want to see on the screen. This is what I typically do if I'm working on one of these productions. It's a lot of responsibility, but it's also a lot of fun because you basically get to kind of jump back and forth between those two worlds of traditional filmmaking and cutting edge virtual production stuff. So it's great, a lot of fun. Again, engine operators, these are folks that are working in Unreal Engine. They're typically coming from the 3D modeling world. They know a ton about Unreal Engine, how to make things look cool on screen. It is a real challenge when you get in front of one of these LED screens because the weirdest things can happen. Things that worked fine on your single computer suddenly break and end display and don't want to look good on the main screen when it's multiple computers rendering it. So being able to really have a deep understanding of Unreal Engine and everything it can do and be able to kind of get under the hood when necessary and fix things and fix them quickly. There's also a whole breed of folks that are just building environments. And when we say environments, we're talking about 3D backdrops. So they may not necessarily be on stage, but they're building things for marketplaces. It's a little more leisurely. You're not under the pressure of a real production, but you still get to influence how these environments are built and what they look like. On set, there is a role for folks that know how to do 2D playback. If we're doing video plates workflow, if they're working with these 2D kind of composites, there's a lot of work to be done there. Driving scenes, interview scenes. I mean, I've seen it come down to 50% of productions are Unreal Engine, 50% of productions are plate playback, and oftentimes it's a mixture of both, where you're kind of going back and forth between Unreal and 2D, again, on a scene-by-scene basis, depending on what's most important. There's roles for folks that are doing color grading, both for the camera pipeline itself, but also for what's on the screen. I mean, there's a whole color pipeline that's happening on the LED volume because it's video processing that's going on, and all of that needs to be synchronized and done at a very high level. So again, if you've got traditional skills in DIT and color grading workflows and you're interested in virtual production, there's definitely a spot for you there. If you're coming maybe more from an architectural background, a live production background, LED operations is a whole other workflow that you can get into. Tons of opportunities. Keeping the LEDs up and running, making sure everything is maintained, working at sort of peak efficiency, replacing, reconfiguring, rebuilding, all that falls under LED operations, and it's a lot of fun. Virtual camera, there's a whole workflow for folks that are helping kind of hand in hand with the traditional cinematographer to figure out things like previewing, pre-vising, tech-vising, just having that ability to work with a camera that is in the virtual world but has interaction with a real-life camera. Motion capture performance. You might, for example, want to create a digital character that has some very specific dance moves, as you can see in this setup. And for that, we use things like Vicon and Faceware on the stage. There's a whole workflow of opportunities, not only for the people that are doing the moves that are being captured, but all of that infrastructure and workflow that's necessary to capture those moves. And finally, more than anything, I think it's really important to emphasize, if you want to work in the virtual production world, you need to have kind of what we call soft skills or set-etiquette. When I say that, what I really mean is, are you good under pressure? Traditional film set is a pressure environment because you've got a lot of money on the line. A lot of things have to be done in a very specific sort of way. Now you add into that the complications of live animation in front of the camera, it can be even more pressure. And those worlds can collide. And this is where having a really good producer and an assistant director setting the tone makes all the difference in the world. But if you want to be in that environment, you need to be ready to be cool under pressure. This is a lot of fun. I highly recommend. I mean, I've done stuff on these virtual production stages that I didn't think I could pull together. And when we do it, it's like everybody just goes, wow, I can't believe we did that. So, it's a lot of excitement, big risk, big reward. I recommend it. And, as we're kind of getting towards the end of this little workshop, I would love to chat with you a little bit about what I think is coming next in virtual production, because as I'm sure you've noticed, the filmmaking world, production in general, is constantly evolving. I've seen changes going from filmmaking with film to digital. I've seen live compositing turn into LED walls, and there's all kinds of crazy new stuff on the horizon that Probably by the time you're watching this is already going to seem very old-fashioned, out of date, but I'll give it my best. It would be crazy of me to not talk about the impact of AI. And where it's coming into virtual production is we're using it to create backdrops. Now, of course, there's a workflow in which AI does this entirely. But for my money, I think it's fascinating to take real-life people, real-life cameras, but put them in front of backdrops that are generated via AI, because one of the great strengths of AI is anything you can imagine, it will just apparate and apparate quickly. Now, of course, you have to get it up to the resolution of the screen, which is typically a lot more than the 720p or 1080p or even 4K that a lot of the AI tools today will make in terms of video. But we also have some really great upscaling tools that will make those things happen quickly. I've been on productions where somebody says, I really want to see this on the screen. We put together an AI backdrop plate, up-converted it, and within 15 minutes, they were filming it in front of real actors and with real cameras. So that mixture of AI and virtual production is really exciting. And again, I'm on the forefront of what can be done with this stuff. And by the time you're watching this, who knows where we'll land. LED screens. Now, this is what you're looking at right here is a look at different densities of LED screens sort of next to each other. The P is the pixel, and the number next to it is the distance in millimeters between each individual pixel. So, for example, the P5 there is 5 millimeters between each of those pixels. Now, if you look at a P5 screen to your naked eye, you will see those pixels. The closer you get more to the P1.27 there on the left, the more and more the pixels kind of disappear to the eye and to the camera, and it looks like a real thing. The screen that I'm on right here, for example, is a P1.5, and at this distance that the camera is from the screen, you don't see the individual pixels because they're just too small to be detectable. So that's only going to accelerate. I've seen screens as low as 0.5 millimeters. The more dense the pixels become, the more complicated the screen is, the more expensive it becomes, and the more energy consumption, the more power, the more render power. There's kind of a sweet spot. We may already have exceeded it. I think we will get to a point where they don't even bother to put the pixel pitch of screens because it'll just be redundant. They will all be so dense that they all will just look good. Here's another interesting thing. Simulation is cool. This is Unreal Engine, because it's a game engine, has a lot of built-in simulation capabilities where you can sort of give it parameters, rules for objects, and they will essentially animate themselves. And I think we've really only begun to tap the surface of what's possible with this technology. Because if you think about it, if I want a real living, breathing world behind my actors with like digital characters that are doing things, weather that's doing things, what better way to do that than with game engine simulation technology and kind of the built-in AI of the engine itself. So there's a lot to be done. Like I could build a city that has traffic patterns and pedestrian walking patterns and weather, you name it. All that stuff can be simulated to the point where instead of trying to manually animate all these different parameters, I can just set up rules and just let the scene animate itself. And it'll just look as real life. So simulation has a lot of potential. Another thing that's coming into virtual production is volumetric video capture. If you think about, I want to put a digital character in this world, but if I capture them like on a green screen, for example, I'm just going to have a person that's flat, that's only really works from one angle. Whereas if I use volumetric video capture, now I have a person, a real life person, place, or thing that is visible from every angle because it was captured from every angle. So I can drop that into a 3D world and reposition it as I would any traditional 3D object. So I think volumetric video capture has a lot of application that, again, we're just beginning to tap. So let's look at a quick video that shows a volumetric capture session and the results in action. Another area that I think has a lot of potential for virtual production is immersive. In this case, you're looking at the Blackmagic Versacine immersive camera, and it's specifically used to create content that's both 8K, 90 frames per second, and full stereo and 180 perspective for the Apple Vision Pro. And this is really cool because, again, it's just another way to create experiences for people to look at that they can interact with in more interesting ways than they might traditional 2D video capture. And this has crossovers to virtual production because there's just new ways to create experiences that are unique and new for people to look at. And hopefully, getting audience attention these days is more challenging than ever. So immersive, I think, has a lot of interest. Real life experiences. The Sphere in Las Vegas is essentially a giant virtual production stage that you sit in and you experience concerts, movies, you name it, sports, kind of the final frontier of experiences for people, because we're at a point where you can see anything you can imagine on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, you name it. But there's still something to be said for having a real life immersive experience with your fellow human beings in a place. And so, innovations like Sphere really lean into that and sort of take virtual production technologies to the next level. And yeah, check out the pixel pitch on the Sphere. This is the exterior of the Sphere, but you can see those are some big pixels. But again, it's such a massive building that you can afford to make your pixels that big and still, they look fine when you're looking at it from a mile away. So what it really comes down to is the future of real-time and AI will converge. I think the sky is the limit to all this stuff, and I'm super excited about it. The world of AI, the world of virtual production, and just all of these other modes of production that we've done for 100 plus years of cinema will all come together and create new experiences, and you can be the one to make those happen. So let's just, again, overview what we looked at during this session. To remind you, you can always go back and rewind, and I encourage you to, because we kind of blasted through a lot of stuff. But, to review, we gave you a definition of what virtual production is. We looked at the components that go into LED volumes. Again, they're very bespoke, and every one of them is built slightly differently, but there's a fair number of shared components that most of them have. We looked at the pre-production that is so important for virtual production that you understand, so that when you get to the production day, you have everything lined up and ready to go and looking its best. And the key part of that is asset creation, so that whatever is going to be in front of your camera really looks photoreal and as high quality as possible, so it just looks realistic and nobody's going like, great virtual production. They're just like, hey, where'd you shoot that? There is a workflow to be followed that will maximize your time on set, and understanding who the key players are, the folks like the virtual production supervisor, the VAD, the engine ops team, understanding what those people do and how to get the most out of their skills is really what's going to set your productions apart. Lighting for virtual production is really critical, because everything that you do on the stage to make things look more integrated and blended will just pay off dividends of it looks real and doesn't look like green screen or doesn't look like rear projection. It just looks like a real set. There's a ton of opportunities both in LED volumes and just in all of the related industries of virtual production. So if you're at all interested in this stuff, I highly recommend you jumping into it. And these things are a moving target. If you think you want to go to the Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center and learn more, I cannot recommend it highly enough. The people there are super smart. If you like what I have to say, I help them kind of get started in the first place, and I do my best to teach there whenever I can, to do workshops. Hit me up. I'd love to hear from you. If you're at all interested, I'd give you advice to go there, because I think it's really great, and it's a short program, so you got nothing to lose. If you're interested in chatting more with me, here is my link to my profile on LinkedIn. I'm constantly researching this stuff and all kinds of new filmmaking techniques, and so if you want to know more, connect with me and follow what I have to say. I do my best to share everything I learn, and it's been an exciting experience all these years. And again, I cannot recommend highly enough, if you're interested in this stuff, look into the Master of Professional Studies degree at NYU Tisch, because you can be touching this stuff for yourself and really learning how it works and getting a great hands-on practical experience in really no time at all, and meet a lot of like-minded people. So here are some links for that program. And, again, I cannot recommend it highly enough. This has been an absolute pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this very much. We did our best to kind of give you a lot of the information that we've learned over the years. Special thanks to all of our great partners that made this possible. Obviously, NYU Tisch, good folks over at AbelCine that I've been working with for many years that made a lot of this stuff possible to help build that stage that's so amazing. The good folks down at Simplemente in Mexico that are very near and dear to my heart, where I get to practice a lot of these things on their stage. The awesome Sang, principal investigator that you'll definitely meet if you go to Virtual Production Center, who is very steeped in this stuff and just a super cool guy. So, A lot of cool people you can meet just by showing up at these things. And yeah, all the other great folks that work with us. Again, I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you've had as good a time as I have in putting this together. And yeah, reach out. I'd love to hear from you. And good luck in your journey of filmmaking. This is the most incredible time I think I've ever witnessed in all my time working in the filmmaking business. Things are just changing almost on an hourly basis. So enjoy it and enjoy the ride.